On January 2nd, 1972, 8 men in tuxedos walked into Manhattan's most exclusive hotel and left with a fortune. Nobody died. Nobody was even hurt. This is the anatomy of the biggest hotel robbery in American history. Track the mechanics, not the mayhem. The Pierre Hotel sits on 5th Avenue at 61st Street, facing Central Park. In 1972, it was where old money slept when it visited New York. Diplomats, heiresses, oil executives, people who traveled with jewelry worth more than most houses. That's the first thing to understand. A robber doesn't rob a hotel for the cash register. He robs it for the vault of safe deposit boxes in the basement, where guests stash the things they don't want sitting in a room protected by a door chain and good intentions. The Pierre's boxes held necklaces, loose diamonds, watches, and bearer bonds. Bonds being cash that happens to be shaped like paper. The appeal was concentration. Rob a jewelry store, and you get one store's inventory. Rob the Pierre's vault, and you get the portable wealth of several hundred extremely rich people, stacked in one room, behind locks that were never designed to stop professionals. The building was a fortress against the street and a filing cabinet on the inside. Every heist of this size has an author, and this one had Bobby Comfort. Comfort was a career thief from Rochester, New York, a hotel robbery specialist who treated the work like a trade rather than a thrill. He studied buildings. He rehearsed. He believed sincerely that violence was a sign you'd planned badly. If you had to hurt someone, you'd already failed the intellectual part of the job. His partner was Sammy Nalo, known as Sammy the Arab, a Detroit-born thief of Middle Eastern descent, colder and considerably less charming than Comfort. Where Comfort was the planner, Nalo was closer to the technician, and by most accounts the more paranoid and difficult of the two. This matters later, because a partnership held together by shared competence and nothing warmer tends to come apart the moment the money's on the table. Behind them stood the Lucchese crime family, one of New York's 5 families. The mob's role here wasn't muscle, it was the back end. You cannot walk into a pawn shop with a Rockefeller-grade diamond necklace and expect anything but a phone call to the police. You need a fence, someone connected who can move stolen goods through channels that don't ask questions. The Lucchese connection was the difference between stealing millions and actually keeping them. Spoiler, that part went about as well as arrangements with organized crime usually go. Here's where the competence porn begins. Comfort didn't improvise. The crew cased the Pierre for weeks, learning the rhythm of the building, when the lobby emptied, how many staff worked the graveyard shift, where the night security actually stood versus where they were supposed to stand. A hotel at 4 in the morning is a very different animal from a hotel at noon, and the crew wanted to meet the sleepy version. The timing was deliberate. Early January, just after the New Year holiday, meant the safe deposit boxes were full. Guests had come to town for the season with their best jewelry and hadn't yet checked out. The vault would never be more loaded than right now. Comfort essentially waited for the fruit to ripen. And then there was the wardrobe. The crew would arrive in formal evening wear, tuxedos, because at 4 a.m. at the Pierre, a man in a tuxedo is invisible. He's a guest coming back from a very long party. A man in a ski mask is a problem. A man in black tie is a Tuesday. The disguise wasn't a disguise at all. It was camouflage, tuned precisely to the environment, which is a more sophisticated idea than most bank robbers ever arrive at. They came in a rented limousine, because of course they did. A limo pulling up to the Pierre before dawn raises exactly 0 eyebrows. The men stepped out and walked into the lobby as guests. Then, quickly and quietly, they drew weapons and took control of the front of the house. The night staff, a doorman, desk clerks, a few others, suddenly found themselves looking at armed men in dinner jackets, which is a genuinely confusing thing to process at 4 in the morning. And this is the tonal signature of the whole job. The robbers were polite. Comfort's crew rounded up staff and the occasional guest, but they didn't brutalize anyone. They reassured people. They explained, in effect, that if everyone cooperated, this would be a story they got to tell for the rest of their lives rather than the last thing that ever happened to them. The threat was real, the guns were real, but the violence stayed theoretical, which was the entire point of Comfort's philosophy. Over the course of the operation, the crew gathered up a couple of dozen people, staff, and a handful of guests who had the poor timing to wander through, and secured them in a room. Accounts describe the hostages being handcuffed or tied, seated, and kept calm. The management of these people was the real skill on display. A panicking hostage is dangerous. They run, they scream, they trip an alarm. Comfort's method was to remove the reason to panic. The crew was calm, so the room stayed calm. One man in the crew reportedly kept up light conversation to keep nerves down. They were, functionally, running a hostage situation as a customer service department, and it worked because everyone in that room quickly understood these were professionals with no interest in hurting them and every interest in getting paid. Keeping people calm also bought time, and time was the whole currency of this robbery, which brings us to the vault. The safe deposit vault was the target, and safe deposit boxes are stubborn things. Each one has 2 locks and typically requires 2 keys, the guest's and the bank's or hotel's guard key, so no single person can open a box alone. That's the security model. The crew's answer was blunt. They didn't finesse every lock. They drilled and pried the boxes open. This is loud, physical, time-consuming labor, the glamorous tuxedos doing the very unglamorous work of chiseling metal boxes open one after another for a couple of hours in a basement. The heist that people imagine as slick and instantaneous was, in reality, a long stretch of manual demolition performed under time pressure by men who couldn't afford to rush and couldn't afford to dawdle. They didn't open every box. They opened enough, dozens of them, cherry-picking their way through the vault and pulling out jewelry, loose stones, watches, cash, and bonds. They were selective by necessity. You can only carry so much, and some of what's in a vault is worthless to a thief. Nobody's fencing your grandmother's will. Then they left. And leaving is the part amateurs never plan properly. The crew packed the take, walked back through the lobby past their cooperative hostages, got into the limousine, and drove off into the early morning. No chase, no shootout, no drop bag of diamonds on the pavement. They exited with the same unhurried confidence they'd entered with, because a running man is suspicious, and a strolling man in a tuxedo is just tired. By the time anyone raised an alarm and police arrived, the men in evening wear were gone, and so was the contents of the vault. The entire operation, entry to exit, had run a couple of hours, and it had run almost exactly to plan. On the mechanics alone, it was close to flawless, which, as any student of these stories knows, is precisely when everything starts to go wrong. The numbers here need a caveat, because heist figures are always slippery. The commonly cited estimate is around $3 million in 1972, though some contemporary figures ran higher into the several millions once you counted everything in those boxes. Adjusted for inflation, that lands comfortably north of $25 million today, and it's routinely called the biggest hotel robbery in history. But here's the honest asterisk. The value of a jewelry haul is genuinely hard to pin down, for a simple reason. The victims report the numbers, and victims of a jewelry theft have every incentive to remember their jewelry as more valuable and possibly more numerous than it strictly was. Some of the stolen fortune may have been insurance optimism. The true figure sits somewhere in a fog that benefits everyone except the historian. The robbery was the easy part. Converting stolen diamonds into spendable money is the hard part, and it's where Comfort's elegant plan met the messy reality of the criminal underworld. Not long after, several of the men, including Comfort and Nalo, were arrested. The break came, as it often does, not from brilliant detective work, but but from the fact that a crew of 8 is 8 people who all know what happened. Loose talk, informants, and the ordinary friction of too many people sharing one enormous secret did the work that no vault lock could. But here's the part that turns a heist story into a genuinely aggravating one. The case against them largely collapsed. There were problems with the evidence, problems with witnesses, and this being 1970s New York, with the mob involved, a suspicion that the machinery of justice had been quietly encouraged to jam. Comfort ultimately served a relatively short sentence relative to the scale of what he had done. For a robbery of this magnitude, the legal consequences were almost insultingly light, and the loot mostly gone. The overwhelming majority of the jewelry from the Pierre was never recovered. It vanished into the fencing network, was broken down, recut, reset, and sold as anonymous stones with no history. A recut diamond is a new diamond as far as the market is concerned, untraceable by design. Which leads to the murkiest chapter of all, the fence side double crosses. By various accounts, once the goods were handed to the Lucchese connected fences to be converted into cash, the robbers got a fraction of what they were owed, if they got much at all. The people who did the dangerous, brilliant part of the job may have been comprehensively cheated by the people whose only job was to sell the results. There is a grim lesson in there about outsourcing the final step of your master plan to organized crime, and the lesson is, don't. Exactly how much reached whom, and how the money was divided and redivided in the aftermath, has never been cleanly established. The heist itself is documented almost minute by minute. The carve-up afterward is a swamp of competing accounts, and everyone with first-hand knowledge had excellent reasons to lie. The one part of this story that ran with mechanical precision was the crime. Everything that came after was improvisation, betrayal, and disappearing evidence, which is to say, the robbery may have been the most honest thing anyone involved did all year. If you want another story where the men sworn to stop the crime were quietly part of it, watch the Mafia Cops, the NYPD detectives on the mob's payroll next. Same New York, same organized crime, except this time, the double cross was wearing a badge.